The woman stood less than a meter away from the electrical panel, holding a cup of cold coffee, her eyes fixed on every movement of the electrician. No polite greetings, no urging words, no judgmental glance. Only silence. A silence so sharp it was clear she wasn't just watching him, she was measuring her own feelings. Her name was Talia Monroe, 32 years old, a lighting designer for stage productions and wedding events, living in an artist's neighborhood by the sea, a place where walls were covered in graffiti, window lights glowed soft and golden, and the sound of waves sometimes played like a natural soundtrack. Talia wasn't the type of woman who tried to impress anyone. She dressed simply, tied her hair neatly, and spoke with a calm tone that was rare to find. But there was something about her. Something that made it impossible to look away. Maybe it was her eyes. The kind that had stared too long at things no one should ever have to see. Before moving here, Talia had spent 3 years in what looked like a perfect relationship. A successful man, charming, articulate, always knew how to show affection at the right moment, and also knew exactly how to twist every mistake into being her fault. Whenever she said, "I'm tired," he'd reply, "You're being ungrateful." When she stepped back to breathe, he called it coldness. Slowly, she stopped being sure whether she even had the right to feel anything at all. She stopped talking, stopped sharing, stopped fighting back. Just tried to survive inside a relationship where trust had been so distorted it no longer resembled itself. When she left, she didn't take much, just a few boxes of old stage lights and her design sketchbook. The thing she tried hardest to keep wasn't her belongings, but her intuition. That core part of her that had been bent out of shape too many times. 2 years later, she lived alone. No dating, no deep connections, just work, therapy, and the slow, quiet process of learning how not to betray herself again. And then she met Rowan Beck on a light, rainy Thursday afternoon at the studio warehouse where she worked. The ceiling lights had started flickering, and the manager called in a contract electrician. No name tag, no uniform, just a tall, neat man carrying a worn tool bag and a look in his eyes that seemed to be hiding from something. Rowan wasn't the talkative type. He didn't give much of an introduction, didn't try to be friendly. He just removed the panel cover, checked each connection, and quietly went about his work. Talia didn't leave the room. She didn't interfere, but she stayed, as if she was waiting to see whether his silence was some kind of dangerous defense, or simply the presence of someone who didn't need to say much to exist. When the lights finally came back on, she gave a small nod. "Thanks," she said, turning back to her mini stage light console. He was packing up his tools when she spoke again. "Do you freelance?" Rowan looked up, a nod. "Then if I need to fix the lights in the courtyard, can I call you?" It wasn't a flirty invitation, not even small talk. It was a test of reflex. "If I open a small door for you to step through, will you break it?" Rowan replied, "Just text me." A few words, nothing more, but enough to make something inside her shift. Not feelings, safety. The ability to feel safe, something she thought had fallen off somewhere along the road out of her old wounds. And for Rowan, a man who had lived for years in the shadow of a reputation that once made people fear him, it was the first time in a long while a woman looked straight at him without flinching, without suspicion, without expectation, and without asking, "Who were you before?" Just a simple question. "If I need you again, can I call you?" A small question. But for two people scarred by broken trust, it was a huge invitation. On Saturday afternoon, Talia sent a text to the number saved under Rowan Electric. It was short, just one line. "The backyard floodlights are still flickering. If you're free, I need you one more time." She wasn't sure why she texted him. The lights weren't urgent. She could have checked them herself if she'd had the patience. But there was something in the silence between them the first time that made her want to try again. Not to test him, but to test herself, to see if she could still trust enough to let someone come back. Rowan replied an hour later, "I can stop by around 4 p.m. tomorrow. That work for you?" The next day when he arrived, the rain had just stopped. The scent of damp grass lingered along the narrow path to the backyard, where Talia had placed rows of small LED lights lining the walkway. She was fiddling with the control box lid when she heard his footsteps approaching, slow and light, like someone used to stepping into spaces that weren't his. "This box probably needs a new sensor," she said without turning around. "I tried opening it, but I was afraid I'd ruin the whole wiring system." Rowan nodded slightly, kneeling down to check without saying much. While he worked, Talia stood beside him, not interfering, only handing over tools whenever he reached out. The sky was dimming. When the lights finally flickered on properly for the first time, she said softly, "Do you drink tea? I just made some peppermint. It's new." They sat in the small kitchen, the back door open to the yard. No music, no TV, just the quiet clink of porcelain cups and the wind teasing the curtain. Rowan took his first sip, raised an eyebrow slightly. "Real tea, not the supermarket bagged kind." She smiled. "I learned how to make tea after I started living alone. Also how to wire lights, replace bulbs, fix relays, not because I wanted to be good at it, just because there was no one left to ask." Rowan was silent for a moment, then said in a low voice, "Doing small things with your own hands is one way to keep yourself whole." It wasn't advice, nor pity. It sounded more like a quiet confession, as if he too had learned to hold himself together by fixing tiny pieces of a life that had once fallen apart. Talia looked over at him. Same rough jacket, same reserved silence, but his eyes were different this time. Less guarded. Not quite open, but not hiding behind walls anymore. "How long have you lived around here?" she asked. "About a year now," he said. "Before that, I left the city, needed a break." "A break from what?" He didn't answer right away. She didn't push. After a few quiet minutes, he said without looking at her, "From the kind of life that makes you stop recognizing yourself." They let the subject drift away. No follow-up, no need to fill the silence. But something moved inside Talia's chest. Not a surge of emotion, just that rare feeling of calm when someone doesn't try to explain or justify everything. Someone who made silence feel safe. When he lifted his sleeve to wipe his hands, the watch on his wrist caught her eye. The design was unusual, not something you'd see every day. Expensive, probably, but understated, elegant in a way that tried not to be noticed. She didn't ask, and he didn't hide it. When Rowan stood to leave, Talia hesitated for a moment. "If I wanted to rewire the studio lights with new motion sensors, would you take the job? As long as you don't mind that I work a bit slow." "Slow's fine, as long as it's right." He nodded. She walked him to the door. No promises, no talk of keeping in touch. Yet somehow that second visit became the reason for a third. Then a fourth. Next time, he didn't come to fix anything. She called him over just to ask whether the string lights should be hung straight or diagonal so they wouldn't cast shadows on the mini stage. He sat down and sketched a quick diagram. For the first time, they laughed. Over a misdrawn angle, a small mistake that somehow made everything feel lighter. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to hold her posture. There wasn't a name for what they had. Not dating, not close friends. But everything between them happened naturally, without trying, like motion sensor lights. They only turned on when someone truly stepped close. Rowan couldn't remember exactly which visit it was when the feeling began. He just knew that after fixing the line of lights running along the wooden stairs behind the studio, when Talia handed him a cup of tea like she always did, he didn't want to leave right away. And for the first time in years, he let himself stay longer than necessary. Not because of the lights, not because of the work, but because of her. Before moving here, Rowan was no stranger to the tech world. He was the founder of a renewable energy startup once hailed as the green solution of the future. His photo, standing among panels and engineers, had graced countless magazine covers, a symbol of youth, ambition, and innovation. And it was his own hand that signed the first layoff orders when the funding began to dry up. He used to believe his reasons were justified, to keep the company alive. But over time, those reasons became slicker, emptier. He signed more contracts that squeezed suppliers, turned a blind eye to the fact that some components didn't meet safety standards, but were cheaper. And the worst of it, he allowed an internal lawsuit to be buried, just to protect the company's final round of funding. The breaking point came when a mid-level employee posted a public whistleblowing statement online, and it set off a wave of media investigations. In less than 2 weeks, the company was in crisis. Investors pulled out, partners walked away, old friends went silent. And the name Rowan Beck, once the face of a bold new generation of entrepreneurs, became the perfect cautionary tale of arrogance, cruelty, and downfall. What he lost wasn't money. He still had assets, lawyers to clean up the mess. What truly collapsed was him. Because for the first time, reading those articles, listening to recordings of his own words from past meetings, he realized something unbearable. He had become the very kind of man his 24-year-old self once swore he'd never be. And that was the moment he knew he couldn't keep living the same way. Rowan disappeared from every event, every piece of media. He deleted all his personal accounts and stepped down from his executive role. Not to hide, but because he knew that if he kept going, he'd keep hurting people. He needed to shut the power off, cut the old circuit completely, stop it from leaking into anyone else's life. He moved to a small coastal town, using his real name but never revealing his past. Worked freelance, replaced breakers, installed bulbs, repaired panels, quietly. No one asked too many questions, and he didn't have to explain. For the first time, he lived without pretending to be the man who always had the answers. Meeting Talia wasn't part of any plan. He hadn't meant to fall for anyone. Didn't believe he deserved to. But every time she stood beside him, not asking where he studied, not searching his name, not treating him like someone who needed to be analyzed or feared, he could breathe a little easier. She looked at him like he was just a person. And that was exactly what terrified him. Because if she ever saw the truth, not the quiet exterior, not the electrician's jacket, but the part of him that had once been selfish, numb, she'd step back, just like everyone else did. But then he realized there was a part of him that no longer wanted to stay hidden forever. Not because he wanted to be loved, but because he wanted to become someone that, even if Talia saw all of him, she wouldn't have to turn away. She made him want to fix something, not in the walls, but in the tangled wiring inside himself. He didn't know what he'd do next, didn't think about a relationship. But every time his phone buzzed with a message from her, "Are you free this afternoon to adjust the hanging lights in the storage room?" He felt a small, quiet ease settle in his chest. Not because of the work, but because, for the first time in years, he wanted to keep a connection. To not let it fade like everything else he'd lost before. Talia couldn't quite remember when her heart started to open again. Maybe it was one rainy evening when they sat in the living room under the soft amber light, and she made peanut butter sandwiches the way she used to as a kid. Maybe it was when Rowan asked her about the lighting designs she'd created. Not to compliment, but to truly understand. Or maybe it was when he washed the dishes without being told. Fumbling with rubber gloves that were clearly too small, yet still finishing every last plate with quiet patience. She never planned to tell him. But one day, as they were walking past a small park near her place, they saw a young couple arguing by the bike racks. She didn't know what the fight was about, but the man's tone made her skin tighten. There was something in his voice that made her turn away and whisper, "I used to be in a relationship like that." Rowan didn't ask right away. They kept walking in silence for a while. When they stopped under a streetlight, he simply said, softly, "You don't have to tell me if you're not ready." Talia replied, "I think I am. It's just, I've never had anyone to tell it to without feeling like I had to justify myself." She told him that her ex-boyfriend used to be incredibly charming, the kind of person who made everyone feel special. He was articulate, always knowing exactly what to say at exactly the right moment. But over time, that charm turned into a kind of trap she couldn't escape from. Every time she tried to express a real feeling, he made her believe she was overreacting. If she got angry, he called her weak. If she had doubts, he said she didn't trust him enough. Eventually, she found herself apologizing. Apologizing for being sad, for needing space, for wanting to be heard. "I lost the ability to tell what was real and what I'd made up in my own head," she said softly, as if confessing to herself as much as to him. Rowan didn't interrupt. He didn't try to turn it into a lesson. He didn't say the usual cliches like, "You deserve better," or "He didn't deserve you." He just looked at her steadily and said, slowly, "I think anyone who survives a relationship like that deserves to be recognized as a warrior." The words made her throat tighten, not because he was flattering her, but because he didn't deny her pain. He saw it as truth, not something to be painted over or simplified. After that day, they started seeing each other more often. Not on a schedule, not by plan. Sometimes she'd be cooking and text him, "I bought too many vegetables, you hungry?" Or he'd finish repairing an electrical box at the park and stop by with fresh bread from the corner bakery. They'd turn on a dim light in the living room, watch old shows that didn't need much attention, and sit quietly together. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was like a light blanket laid across the space between them, just warm enough, never suffocating. Once, while they were making pizza together, she asked, "You don't use social media, do you?" Rowan shook his head. "Not really my thing." Not your thing because it's annoying or because there's another reason? He looked at her for a moment. I've lived in a lot of places. Some of them, I don't want to revisit, not even in memory. That answer was one of the few glimpses he ever gave her. Beyond that, he didn't share much about himself. No family photos, no stories about friends. When she asked what he used to do, he just said, I ran something that doesn't exist anymore. She didn't push. Still, something inside her didn't quite line up. Not suspicion, but the quiet sense that he wasn't hiding out of deceit. He just wasn't sure anyone could handle the truth. Talia understood that feeling. She too had once avoided talking about what she'd been through, afraid that if someone heard it, they'd never see her the same way again. So she didn't blame him. But she couldn't deny the distance that lingered between them, like the shadow under a dim light. Sometimes it felt close enough to touch, but just one step sideways, and everything turned strange again. Trust isn't something you can rush. It has to grow slowly, like daylight. It can't be forced. And while she felt herself stepping out of her shell, she also saw that the man in front of her was still moving toward her, one careful step at a time. Talia never expected absolute clarity in any relationship, especially not with someone like Rowan. She accepted that everyone carries chapters they can't speak of, shadows that need time before they can open their doors. But deep down, she still believed that if what they had was real, sooner or later, he'd share it. That belief was fragile, but she let it grow anyway, little by little, the way someone protects a flame in the wind. She just hadn't expected the truth to arrive the way it did, so suddenly, and by chance. That day, Talia was working at the city's biggest art event of the year. She'd been invited to design the entire lighting system for the outdoor opening ceremony. The rehearsal started early in the morning. The sun wasn't yet bright enough to outshine the LED lights, and she was double-checking the lighting sequences when the show's director, a man in his 40s, easygoing by nature, left his iPad open on the nearby table. On the screen was an old news article. She only glanced at it while reaching for her water bottle, but the image struck her instantly. A familiar face, Rowan's face, staring out from behind a cluster of press microphones, eyes cold and distant. And above it, the bold headline read, "The ruthless face behind Solinek's collapse." Her heart skipped a beat. She turned away immediately, not wanting the director to notice her reaction. But from that moment on, her mind was no longer at the rehearsal. The lighting diagrams, the angles, the color layers, all of it blurred beneath a single echoing thought. Who is he? Why didn't he tell me? And if everyone else knows, why am I the only one who didn't? That night, when she got home, she didn't even take off her shoes. She sat down on the couch and opened her laptop. Typed his name into the search bar. The results appeared faster than she expected. Dozens of articles, reports, photos. She realized his face wasn't some stranger's image to the world, only to her. She had been the one standing in the dark. Rowan Beck, former CEO of Solinex, a green energy tech company once chased by global investors. He'd been called the fearless young mind redefining the future. But it was also him who signed the deal selling most of the company's shares to a massive corporation. The move that led to mass layoffs, the shutdown of research divisions, and the closing of multiple branches. The articles detailed how hundreds of employees lost their jobs in just 2 weeks. Many lost their health insurance, forced to resign without warning. One piece even included a leaked recording from a meeting where Rowan's voice said flatly, "This is what's necessary for profit." No emotion, no hesitation. Talia stopped reading there. Not because she couldn't handle it, but because she felt something tear inside her. A painful split between two truths, the sting of betrayal and the shame of having trusted so completely. She wasn't angry at his past. She knew everyone carried mistakes, histories, regrets. What broke her was that he hadn't told her, that he'd let her keep stepping closer each day without ever saying that the path she was walking toward him was one built over the ruins of people he'd left behind. She didn't call him right away, didn't send a long message. She needed a few days to make sure her reaction would come from clarity, not from pain. Then one afternoon, when Rowan arrived with a new set of light sensors as they'd planned, she invited him in. No tea, no candles, no background music like before. She handed him a printed copy of the article and set it on the table. Rowan looked at it, said nothing for a long time. Talia sat across from him, not avoiding his eyes. She didn't cry, didn't yell, didn't storm out like in old movie scenes. She just asked, her voice steady, "If you believed I could see you, Why didn't you let me see all of you?" Rowan stayed silent for another moment. But what quieted in his eyes wasn't defensiveness, it was realization. She knew, and her question wasn't just about secrets, it was about trust. About how he decided deep down that he wasn't worthy of being fully known. And by doing that, he'd hurt her, in the very way he once swore he'd never hurt anyone again. The silence that followed her question wasn't the silence of avoidance. Rowan didn't try to change the subject, didn't rush to explain or defend himself. He just sat there, eyes fixed on the printed page, as if he were looking at a distant version of himself, someone he used to be and no longer wished to return to. "I didn't think I deserved to have anything back," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Not until I met you." Talia didn't respond right away. Those words, once upon a time, might have made her heart ache in the sweetest way. But now she knew something else. Love, no matter how sincere, wasn't enough without clarity. She was no longer in the phase of loving someone through the version she imagined of them. No longer naive enough to believe that love alone could fill the gaps left by broken trust. She needed truth. Not a one-time confession, but something steady, consistent, like light. She needed to know that if she took one more step toward him, she wouldn't fall into darkness with no one there to catch her. She told Rowan she needed time, space, not out of anger, but to steady what was inside her heart, and maybe his too. Rowan didn't try to stop her. He didn't ask how long, didn't make promises. He just nodded. They didn't see each other after that. Talia returned to her own rhythm, this time not to hide, but to face things. She kept up with therapy, no longer skipping sessions out of exhaustion or excuses. She rewrote the syllabus for her advanced lighting design class at the art center, a course she'd once turned down because she hadn't felt stable enough to teach. Now, standing before her students, explaining how a single light source could shift the emotion of an entire room, she realized she was changing too. Quietly, steadily. She didn't block Rowan's number, didn't delete their old messages, but neither of them reached out. She didn't know where he was, what he was doing, and part of her didn't want to, because if what they had was real, it should be able to survive outside the signal range. As for Rowan, he didn't return to the city. Didn't go online to defend himself. He took a simple job, maintaining the electrical systems at a small nursing home about 15 miles from Talia's studio. There were no stage lights there, no one who recognized him, no questions about the past. But it was there that he relearned how to work for reasons that had nothing to do with reputation or resume. Just to do things right, to do them with care. For the first time in years, he stayed in one place long enough to remember the details. Which hallway lights needed rewiring, which outlets were loose, which elderly resident always forgot to turn off the corridor lamps at midnight. He didn't look for bigger projects, didn't call anyone, didn't send any emails to explain himself. Until one quiet weekend afternoon, when a small thought crossed his mind. He walked into a little lighting store and chose a set of frosted glass pendant lamps, the kind that gave off a soft, calm glow, meant for reading corners or quiet rooms. Not powerful, not showy, just enough to make a room feel safe again. He asked the shop to deliver it to Talia's address. No sender's name, just a small handwritten note, the slanted letters reading, "Lights for your room. I don't know how to fix anything big, but maybe just a little light." Talia received the package on a Monday morning. She didn't need to check the receipt to know who it was from. When she opened the box, her hands trembled slightly. Not from overwhelming emotion, but because sometimes the simplest things are the ones that make you pause the longest. She set the lamp on the shelf but didn't turn it on right away. She just sat there, watching it in the fading daylight spilling through the window. Inside her, a quiet space began to shift, not to forget the hurt, but to make room for something else. Something that, if it ever returned, would have to come back in real light. One early morning in October, Talia left home earlier than usual. She didn't call ahead, didn't send a message. She just went, carrying in her bag a roll of warm-toned LED lights and a few connectors she'd bought the week before. The air wasn't cold, but she still wrapped herself in an old scarf, not for warmth, but as a thin layer of protection between herself and the world. Though deep down she knew that today, the only thing she really had to face wasn't the world at all, but one person. The nursing home sat on the edge of town, about a half-hour drive from the studio. The old iron gate opened to a small courtyard, lined with flower beds fading at the end of the season. The building wasn't big, but it was clean and quiet. When she asked for his name at the front desk, the young receptionist nodded and pointed to the second floor, the common room near the hallway with windows overlooking the garden. Rowan was replacing an outlet near the window frame when she walked in. He turned at the sound of her footsteps. His face didn't show surprise. Maybe he'd imagined this moment might come. Or maybe he'd never really stopped waiting. "Do you have 5 minutes?" she asked. "I do," he said, brushing the dust off his hands before gesturing toward a small tea table by the window. "It's quiet here." They sat down facing each other. Nothing to hide behind. No distance left to retreat into. Rowan placed the cup of tea he'd made earlier on the table. He didn't speak right away, neither did she. For the first time, the silence between them wasn't a shield. It was space to breathe. "I didn't come to ask why," she began. "I already know, and I didn't come to hear you justify it." "I'm not here to justify," Rowan said. His voice was low, steady. "I just want you to know. I once believed I didn't deserve to have anything again. Not a single thing. Until I met you." Talia clasped her hands together in her lap, not out of emotion, but to keep herself still. "Do you know," she said slowly, "what it feels like to trust someone who keeps a part of the truth from you? It's like standing under a light and never knowing when it might flicker." Rowan nodded. "I know." She turned her gaze toward the garden. Sunlight slipped through the leaves, scattering pale gold across the table between them. "I won't ask you to forgive me," he said quietly. "I don't think I have the right to. But if you still want to, I'll start over. Slowly, carefully, the way I'd rewire a burned circuit, not to make it shine for anyone else, but to make sure it never hurts anyone again." Talia didn't answer right away. She hadn't come to say "I love you," and she hadn't come to be convinced. She came to see whether, after everything, she still had enough trust left to begin again. Not for him, but for herself. She reached into her bag and pulled out the small roll of LED lights and a set of connectors. "We start with the first bulb," she said, not smiling, but her voice was soft, like wind gliding over still water. Rowan looked at what she handed him, then at her, and something unspoken flickered in his eyes. Not happiness exactly, but hope, the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't blaze or demand attention, but stays, steady, warm, like the gentle amber light that makes a room feel alive again. That afternoon, the two of them stood together in the main hall of the nursing home. No explanations were offered. None were needed. They simply began, gently fixing each section of the light strip along the ceiling, connecting every bulb one by one. Neither spoke much. Talia handed him the tools. Rowan held the connectors steady. When the first bulb came to life, they didn't clap or cheer. They just stood there for a quiet moment, watching the light spread slowly across the warm floor. The elderly residents sat on benches in the distance. Some turned to look. A few smiled. One white-haired woman whispered, "It looks like the Christmas lights we had at home long ago." They kept going, adding more bulbs. Soon, a soft, warm chain of lights stretched across the hall, not for decoration, but so the slower steps could find their way more easily. So the nights would feel a little less cold. So those who rarely had visitors could still sit beneath the glow and feel not entirely alone. Rowan didn't take her hand. She didn't lean on him. There was no music, no declaration. Just two people who had once been broken, trying to reach each other again through the simplest act of kindness they could share. Not for themselves, but for someone else. When the last light was connected, Rowan tightened the final screw and turned to her. "It's good now," he said. She nodded, taking the leftover strand of wire in her hand. Looking toward the glow, not to admire it, but to make sure it was truly shining. Some circuits once burned seem impossible to mend, but with enough patience, enough gentleness, the light can return. Not dazzling, not perfect, but warm enough for someone to know they're no longer alone. We've all hurt someone, or been hurt ourselves. But do you believe that, with time and honesty, a broken connection can be mended? With trust, slowly and quietly, without needing to be grand? Have you ever forgiven someone, or yourself, the way Talia and Rowan chose to? If this story brought something up in your heart, feel free to share it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, so you won't miss the next stories of healing. Thank you for staying with me until the very end.